The storekeeper said work or starve. The freight driver said, get in the wagon. Nora Phelps had not seen the sun in 11 days. Cleet Hargrove's general store in Harlan Gulch had no windows on the back wall, and the back wall was where Nora lived, behind the flour barrels, on a straw pallet, in a space barely wider than her shoulders. She worked from 5 in the morning until 9 at night, stocking shelves, sweeping floors, counting inventory, and serving customers who looked through her as if she were part of the merchandise. In exchange, Hargrove gave her a meal a day, usually cold biscuits and whatever was left in the pot, and a place to sleep that was technically indoors, but bore a closer resemblance to a root cellar. She had come to Harlan Gulch 4 months ago on the promise of a proper job. An advertisement in the Boise paper had described a position for a capable young woman, room and board provided, fair wages. The wages had never materialized. The room was the pallet behind the flour. The board was the cold biscuits. And the capable young woman had become, by degrees so gradual she barely noticed them happening, an indentured servant who owed Hargrove for her train ticket, her meals, and the cost of the merchandise she had supposedly damaged. A list of debts that grew longer every week, and that she suspected he was inventing. She was 23 years old. She had no family. Her parents had died of cholera when she was 14, and she had raised herself in a succession of boarding houses and laundry rooms in Boise, working jobs that paid just enough to keep her fed and not enough to let her leave. When the advertisement appeared, it had seemed like a door opening, the kind of opportunity that people in her position waited their whole lives for. She had not understood then that some doors open only to close behind you. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday in October. Nora was on her knees behind the counter, sorting nails into bins, when the front door opened and a voice she did not recognize said, "I need 10 pounds of flour, 5 of sugar, and a box of cartridges." She stood up. The man at the counter was tall and broad across the shoulders, with a weather-darkened face and hands that were permanently stained with axle grease. He wore a canvas coat and a hat so battered it had lost its original shape and settled into something that looked like a geological formation. He was looking at her with steady brown eyes that held no particular expression, neither curiosity nor indifference, just the attentive gaze of a person accustomed to taking in details. "The flour's on the back wall," she said. "I'll get the sugar." She was weighing the sugar when Hargrove came in from the storeroom. He was a small man with a sharp face and quick, restless eyes that never settled on anything for more than a second, as if he were afraid of being caught looking. He glanced at the customer, glanced at Nora, and positioned himself behind the counter with the practiced ease of a man who had learned to occupy the center of every room. "Barrett Lowe," Hargrove said. "Haven't seen your wagon in a while. Been running the Boise route, just switched to the mountain circuit." Barrett looked at the sugar Nora was weighing. "That scale's off." Nora looked at the scale. She looked at Hargrove. Hargrove's face went very still. "The scale is fine," Hargrove said. "It's reading 4 ounces heavy. I've been buying supplies for 8 years. I know what 5 pounds of sugar looks like." Barrett leaned forward and tapped the counterweight. "That's been filed down." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Nora had ever heard. She looked at the counterweight, a small iron cylinder that she had never examined closely, and understood, with a shock that felt like cold water, what Hargrove had been doing. Filing the counterweight meant every customer who bought by weight was getting less than they paid for. It meant the difference went into Hargrove's pocket. It meant every transaction she had processed for 4 months was a small theft she had unknowingly participated in. Hargrove smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been caught but refused to acknowledge it, tight, thin, and entirely without warmth. "I think you should take your business elsewhere, Mr. Lowe. I think you should fix your scale, Mr. Hargrove." Barrett gathered his purchases, paid the correct amount, which he calculated himself, aloud, in front of 2 other customers who had stopped to listen, and walked out. Nora followed him. She did not plan to. She did not make a decision. Her legs carried her through the door and across the porch and into the street, where Barrett Lowe was loading supplies into a freight wagon hitched to a team of 4 mules. "Mr. Lowe," she said. He turned. "How did you know about the scale?" "I haul freight for a living. I weigh things every day. You develop a feel for it. He set a sack of flour in the wagon bed. How long have you been working for him? 4 months. How much does he pay you? She was quiet for a moment. He says I owe him. For the train ticket, and the meals, and the breakage. Barrett stopped loading. He looked at her, not with pity, not with the casual sympathy of a man who felt bad but was going to walk away, but with the focused, practical attention of someone who was assessing a situation and deciding what to do about it. How much does he say you owe? $42. You don't owe him $42. You don't owe him 42 cents. That's a debt trap. He brings women in, charges them for everything, and works them until they run or break. He paused. You're not the first. She felt the ground tilt, not dramatically. She had learned to absorb shocks quietly, the way a tree absorbs wind, but enough to make her put her hand on the side of the wagon to steady herself. I can't leave, she said. He has my things, my trunk, my clothes, everything. What's in the trunk? She thought about it. A spare dress, a pair of stockings, her mother's Bible, a tintype of her parents. Things that mattered, but things that could be replaced, except for the tintype and the Bible, which could not. Nothing I can't carry, she said. Barrett Lowe looked at her. He looked at the store. He looked at the mules, who were standing patiently in their traces, chewing their bits, and looking generally unimpressed with the moral complexities of the situation. Get in the wagon, he said. She did not hesitate. She walked back into the store, past Hargrove, who looked up from the counter with the first flicker of alarm she had ever seen on his face, and straight to the back wall, where she grabbed her mother's Bible and the tintype from under the pallet and walked back out without stopping, without speaking, without looking at the man who had kept her in the dark for 4 months. She climbed onto the wagon seat. Her hands were shaking. Her legs were shaking. Everything in her body was vibrating with the adrenaline of what she had just done. The simple, enormous act of walking out of a place that had been designed to hold her. She had no plan, no money, no change of clothes. She had a Bible, a tintype, and the seat of a freight wagon, and for the first time in 4 months, she had a choice that was her own. Barrett did not comment on her shaking. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a blanket, an old wool army blanket, faded but clean, and set it on her lap without a word. Then he clicked to the mules, and they moved, and the wagon rolled down the main street of Harlan Gulch, and Nora Phelps sat on the bench with the Bible in her lap and the tintype in her pocket, and felt the October sun on her face for the first time in 11 days. They drove in silence for an hour. The road wound through pine forests and along ridgelines where the air was sharp and clean and smelled like nothing she had breathed in months. She sat on the wagon seat and watched the landscape open up around her, the valleys, the peaks, the enormous sky, and she felt something loosen in her chest, a constriction she had grown so accustomed to that she had forgotten it was there. Where are you going? She asked. Silver Creek, then Chalice, then back to Boise. He glanced at her. The circuit takes 3 weeks. I've got room on the wagon, and I can drop you in Boise if that's where you want to go. I don't know where I want to go. I just know where I don't want to be. That's a start. Barrett Lowe, she learned over the following days, was a man of few words and reliable habits. He rose at 4, fed and watered the mules before he ate anything himself, drove until noon, rested the team for 2 hours, and drove again until dusk. He made camp with the methodical efficiency of a person who had done it 1,000 times. Fire built, coffee boiled, mules unhitched and hobbled, bedroll laid out beside the wagon wheel, and he did it all in a silence that was not unfriendly, but simply economical, the silence of a man who had no one to talk to and had adjusted accordingly. On the first night she could not sleep. She lay in the bedroll beside the wagon wheel and listened to the sounds of the forest. The wind in the pines, the creek running somewhere below them, the mules shifting and breathing in their hobbles, and she waited for the fear to come. The fear of being alone in the wilderness with a man she did not know. The fear of having no money, no home, no plan. The fear that she had made a mistake, that she should have stayed, that the cold biscuits in the dark room were at least certain, The fear did not come. What came instead was a vast, disorienting relief, the sensation of a weight lifting that she had been carrying so long she had mistaken it for her own body. She lay under the stars and breathed, and the breathing was easy, and the air tasted like pine and cold water, and she fell asleep without deciding to. He gave her a bedroll and a blanket from the wagon. He cooked for both of them. Beans, bacon, coffee, biscuits that were better than anything Hargrove had ever fed her. He did not ask questions about Hargrove or about her life before the store. He treated her with a straightforward, unperformative decency that she found both comforting and disorienting, as if she had stepped off a ship and onto solid ground, and her legs had not yet remembered how to walk on something that did not move. On the third night, camped beside a creek in a valley of yellow aspens, she told him about herself. Not because he asked, he never asked, but because the silence had become comfortable enough to hold the truth. She told him about her parents, about the cholera, about the boarding houses and the laundry rooms, and the years of work that never quite added up to a life. She told him about the advertisement and the train ticket and the gradual, suffocating realization that she had traded one trap for another. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he poured her another cup of coffee and said, "Hargrove's been running that game for years. The sheriff in Boise knows about it. He just doesn't care, because Hargrove pays his taxes, and the women who get caught are usually too poor to complain. Then nothing will change. Something already changed. You left." He looked at her across the fire. "That's not nothing, Nora." It was the first time he had used her given name. The sound of it, spoken in his low, steady voice, by the light of a fire in a valley of aspens, made something crack open in her that she had been holding shut for a very long time. She rode the circuit with him, 3 weeks of mountain roads and small towns, and the steady rhythm of the mule's hooves, and the creak of the wagon, and the enormous, liberating silence of the high country. She helped with the driving when his hands cramped. She cooked when he was too tired. She learned to unhitch the team, to check the mule's hooves for stones, to grease the axles and tighten the wheel bolts, and read the weather from the shape of the clouds. At each stop on the circuit, Barrett delivered supplies to general stores and trading posts, unloading sacks of flour, crates of canned goods, bolts of fabric, and hardware, with the practiced efficiency of a man who could calculate weight distribution in his sleep. He introduced her to the station managers and shopkeepers as a matter of course, and she noticed that they treated her with the casual respect they showed any working person. Not the dismissive blankness she had endured at Hargrove's, but the straightforward acknowledgement of a person doing a job. She was good at it. The work was physical and practical, and immediately useful, and she discovered in herself a capacity for it that surprised her, a competence that had been buried under years of drudgery and had never had the chance to surface. Barrett noticed. He did not compliment her directly. That was not his way, but he began to trust her with tasks he had previously done himself. And trust, she was learning, was Barrett Lowe's highest currency. In Silver Creek, he introduced her to the station manager as "my partner, Nora Phelps." The word hit her like sunlight after a long darkness. Partner. Not employee, not servant, not the girl behind the flour barrels. Partner. In Chalice, he bought her a pair of driving gloves, good ones, lined with wool, the kind that cost more than he would ever admit. He left them on the wagon seat without a note, and when she put them on, they fit perfectly, and she understood that he had been paying attention to the size of her hands, the way he paid attention to the weight of sugar. Precisely, quietly, with the practiced eye of a man whose life depended on getting the measurements right. On the last night of the circuit, camped on a ridge above the Boise Valley with the city lights visible as a faint glow on the eastern horizon, Barrett sat by the fire and did something she had never seen him do. He looked nervous. "I could use a permanent partner on the circuit," he said, addressing his coffee cup rather than her. "The work's hard, the pay's modest, and the mules have opinions about everything. But the country's beautiful, and the wagon's dry, and He stopped. He looked at the fire. He looked at the sky. He looked at his coffee cup. "I've been driving alone for 6 years, and I don't want to drive alone anymore." Nora looked at him. at the grease-stained hands and the battered hat, and the face that had been weathered by 6 years of mountain roads into something strong and honest, and deeply, unmistakably kind. "Barrett," she said. He finally looked at her. "I haven't seen the sun in 4 months," she said. "I'm not going back inside." He smiled. It was a slow, uncertain smile. The smile of a man who had forgotten how, and the most beautiful thing she had seen since the aspens in the valley 3 weeks ago. The mules stamped in their hobbles. The fire crackled, and the woman who had lived behind the flour barrels sat on a ridge above the world with a man who had said 4 words, "Get in the wagon," that had changed the entire direction of her life, and the sky was full of stars, and the road ahead was long, and she was ready for it.